Yeah, Lubbock City, it's 11:58. Lubbock City Council is in regular session.
Okay. First item on the agenda, number 5, public comment for this. Anyone signed up today? No one signed up. All right. Take up item number 6. Consider a budget amendment amending the FY fiscal year 2018-19 capital program to amend the capital improvement project 92-472 substation rebuild on Slayton. We have a motion to bring that up.
So moved.
A motion and a second. We'll bring that up. Andy, I think you did.
Yeah, this is a budget amendment that affects 2 capital projects. The first one is the substation rebuild at Slayton. That's an increase of $700,000 to that capital project from $9.75 million to $10.45 million. Also affects the 115 kV line construction at Red Raider Tap. That's an increase of $550,000, taking that project from $1,195,000 to $1,745,000. The reason for the increases on both projects is similar. There have been some design changes. Specifically, these transmission poles are now, we're wanting to have an underbuild, which is the distribution component, to carry 2 circuits instead of 1. And so that has increased the cost. There's also some steel arms that will be there instead of fiberglass, which increases the cost. So that's the main reason for the change. Also, a little bit of additional engineering fees and adding in a little bit of contingency based on what we've seen in some of these construction contracts with some change orders that do occur from time to time. So that is basically the reason for the increase on both of those projects. The funding will come from it's additional financing that will borrow out of that note program that the board and the council recently approved. So we've taken $1,250,000 in total additional that we'll borrow against that note. Reminder that we'll also have the 1.5 times increase in TPOS revenues that will accompany that. So it's still a net benefit to the utility, even though there's an increase here. So just to keep that in mind as you consider this.
All right, discussion. Any questions? All right, all those in favor say so by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? That one passes. We will now attend and participate, item number 7, attend and participate in Lubbock City Council meeting regarding the following matters.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, we're already in session, so is there a motion to consider item 7A? Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Thank you, Mr. Patterson-Harris. You heard Mr. McCollum's, Mr. Bertram's background on this. Council, do you have questions on this?
Well, to be honest with you, we didn't get our agendas at all. Not here today. We had
You didn't get an electronic version?
That may not be EUB's problem.
Well, here's my concern about doing business this way. I think there may be a once in a 10 or 12 blue moons kind of situation where we need to act together here at a meeting and do something special, but it needs to have some real sense of urgency to it. I think our citizens expect us to meet twice a month on TV, in the light of day, and so this was never. I only found out about this when the city manager, after coming back from vacation, came in and said, "Did anybody reach out to you about this?" And nobody had. I know the city secretary's office was not consulted. I think the city attorney's office maybe was copied in on an email. That was about it. But I just feel like we're the ones, the 7 of us are the ones that would fade the heat if somebody said, "Why are you doing business like that instead of the way you normally do business?"
Can I ask why are we doing this way? We haven't done this before.
budget amendments.
I can respond to that. The budget amendments that require additional funding have to be approved by the council on 2 separate readings. So if we had gone through the normal council meetings, it would be July. I guess the second reading would not occur until July. This way, there's a chance that we would shorten that schedule.
Okay, so this is not shuffling between projects?
No, this is a project, and actually the resolution there's a resolution on the board agenda that approves the projects that this amendment will cover, which are contingent upon getting the budget amendment approved. We can't go forward with those projects until we get the budget amendment approved. So it's just a matter of shortening the schedule.
And I would explain that. I felt like it was okay. Nobody wants this thing done faster than I do. Okay? I think I'm on the record for now. I don't even think I have to prove that to say anything to prove that anymore. So, but that's my concern. I would explain the situation about why I don't have a problem with it, but it's different for us. I think that's my concern about it. I'll yield the floor to anybody else on the council that's got questions or comments. Mr. Griffin.
Just for verification's sake, Mr. Buckland, will you go over the dollars again? Just
Sure. The increase to the substation rebuild at Slayton is an increase of $700,000, so going from $9,750,000 to $10,450,000. And then for the 115 kilovolt line construction off the radiator cap, that's a $550,000 increase, taking that project from $1,195,000 to $1,745,000.
I just want you, I appreciate, Andy, you giving us those dollar amounts today. Thank you.
For everyone else, look at page 68 there.
The only thing I would add is that City Council, we do this all the time on our projects. We sometimes want them to go faster. We can't. So I think that kind of goes to what the mayor is saying. It's in an emergency, sure. But it's just a matter of doing this openly. And obviously, if I've not seen this until today,
One comment, not to argue with you, but there will be a second reading on this one at a regular city council meeting, and I've had an opportunity to bring it before the public.
The problem for us is that to do a budget amendment, it takes us 2 months, where for the city process, it's a month process. And so it cuts the time in half, basically, especially with these. We're getting to critical projects that a delay in a project could delay the entire program. I'm not sure that these are in that vein, but that is the issue that we have faced over time, that we have a board meeting and we can't have the first reading until the next month. So it overall, from the beginning to the end, it's a 2-month process, which when we get to the critical stages will be significant. And I understand y'all's concern about having one reading here and the second reading there, but it does impact the timing of our projects, and it certainly will going forward.
Does that help if we have a special call just for that item?
Well, it would be the special call, and then the regular council meeting at the end of the month. Yeah, the next one would be this month, so that would be the second reading under this scenario, if the council is okay.
I think what you're asking is, you want to
Have we had special calls just for that item?
There's a significant amount of time to get it on the council agenda in advance, and so certainly we could do that where you could maybe gain a couple of weeks, and if you hold a special board meeting, we were just trying to do it when everybody's together anyway, rather than calling special meetings unnecessarily. So.
Well, we're willing to help there on those and doing that, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it is, but we have another one, I guess, for their sake. Let's make sure they're made aware of it and everything else going forward, and everyone can reach whatever they need to see. We don't have this issue.
And the other thing we might think about doing, and this is just me talking, we've done this before, but we might be willing to put something on a council agenda, Andy, without the backup, and then provide the backup at the meeting, or
we had real issues doing that.
We've done that a few times, and that's how we normally, and I'm not speaking out of school, I don't believe, I think that's normally how we handle something when we're trying to move with light speed in a relative term, of course. But so something, because I know that would be sort of waiving our general rules around the agenda itself and all of that. I mean, that's a fair statement, is it not? Council, further discussion on this. Certainly it's our prerogative to approve the motion or to postpone the motion to consider it next week, if you feel like that's more appropriate. I can't see all you guys at the end, so if you got something to say, you need to speak up. Okay. You okay, Randy?
I would feel more comfortable postponing.
I'm inclined not to postpone it.
Good. So,
Well, I think we've made our concerns known, and that's what will happen here.
Okay.
Duly noted.
I think after reading the backup, I'm fine with it. I think we can get the project going.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to approve item 7A as a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion to approve item 7A, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by that same sign?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-1. We will now, we're still in session, so I'll hand it back over to you, Mr. Odom.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, let's bring up number 8, that our presentation discussion on the director utilities.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just hit a few highlights here. I'll just hit a few highlights in the written material, and then, of course, if y'all have any questions, feel free to holler out. On page 73 of the packet, there's some discussions about some of the posting that we've done on our web pages and whatnot, and we're sharing weekly posts on the AMI progress and linking to our AMI page that's on our website, and that's led to an increase in page views. So there's a lot of interest out there in our AMI project, which is moving forward. On page 75, we have been doing. Matt has been doing some publications about summer heat and things that customers can do to prepare for the summer heat. Energy saving tips from Energy Star and the Department of Energy. We will continue to produce stories that try to help customers reduce their energy use and save energy. On page 76, there were quite a few media stories over the last month, kind of higher than the normal rate. And, of course, we got some coverage on the lower rates that we talked about at the last meeting as well, which was good. On page 81, I was going to call your attention to the reliability graph. It's on the right-hand column down towards the bottom, not next to the bottom slide. System average interruption duration index. After having a lot of stormy weather this spring, and May was stormy too, but if you look at the outages that we experienced this May compared to what we had last May, it was a little improved. So we've seen some improvement in reliability when you look at a rolling 12-month average. So it's, much of our reliability issues, outage issues are related to storms, and so the reason that we like to look at that 12-month rolling graph is that it kind of gives you a trend over a longer period of time. Anyway, it's some positive improvement there this last month. on page 83, we did have kind of an uptick in calls. May is the busy month for customer service department because we've got a lot of move-outs. The tech students are all moving out. So there was one day at the end of May where we had almost 3,000 calls in 2 days from people moving out. So that's pretty heavy volume. And so we didn't meet our KPIs last month. We did add 403 customers to paperless billing, which is continuing to trend towards getting more and more people to be paperless and more people signing up for electronic billing. With that, I will call your attention to the AMI graph on page 87. You can see the neighborhoods where we've started deploying the advanced meters. Noteworthy there. We don't cover that in your report, Andy.
I'll cover a little bit in the budget presentation, but yeah, if y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
What's the reason for, Southwest Lubbock is on this geographic?
I'll let Todd or Michelle.
Hey, I've already got mine.
I want mine.
So the strategy for deployment is really balancing three different opposing things. One, the technology, you really want to install the meters around the individual collectors. Two, you want to be geographic so you're not jumping all over town. And then the third one is really balancing the workload for the meter reading staff. And one of the strategies that we employed was we took the staff, the routes that are the hardest to get done in a single day, and we started working parts of those routes to bring them down so the meter reading workforce levels off the amount of work instead of having really, really busy days and then really, really light days. That corresponds and so happens to line up with a lot of the hard read routes are in that southwest corner. We are distributing throughout the service territory, and as you see the weeks go by, you will see it start filling in more to the northeast. But the technology requires you to build out a mesh because one meter talks to the next meter, so they have to stay in a progression and evolve out like that. So that's the basic strategy on why the deployment plan was set up the way it is.
And you have yours, you can't use the mobile device yet, or no?
I'm sorry?
You can't use the mobile device yet. You've got a smart meter on your house.
No, that is phase 2, which will be in the next year's budget. That's incorporated there. So we have to wait for the new billing system to be in place to be able to provide those additional services.
Mr. Chair. So when will you have an actual date as to when the remainder of the deployment will take place?
So we're deploying, and we're planning to be done right after the first of the year. So we should have 100% of electric right after the first of the year. The schedule for the exact routes are laid out, but it changes kind of on a weekly basis depending on how much work we got done versus there's almost 2 weeks a month where you can't work because when the meter readers are out reading and that route's open for billing, we don't do any meter exchanges. So there's a blackout period where you can't work certain areas. So if we get a week behind or a week ahead, then we have to rearrange the routes, which is why it's not a published schedule because it changes, frankly, too often. Yes, sir.
On the cannot complete, denied access, locked gate, how is this remedied in the future?
So, and the cannot complete section, and I'll draw your attention to the now completed line as well. This is really a measure of first pass success. You go there the first time, was I able to change the meter or not? If you couldn't change the meter, it shows up on this cannot complete list. And then it goes into special handling where we make additional phone calls, additional visits to the home to try to schedule appointments. We leave a door hanger. We do multiple contact points to the customer to try to resolve that. And if you see the now complete of 1,011, those were once cannot completes, but through that process we were able to successfully exchange those meters. So it's just really a measure of the first pass success rate, not the overall success rate of the deployment.
I understand. Thank you.
questions, I'll give it back to David.
One more question on the inventory piece. Have we overcome that, or is that still an issue?
It is still an issue, and it really revolves around what are very low volumes of commercial meters. So, we have all the inventory we need for the broad-based residential. We did run into a couple inventory workflow issues around the larger commercial meters. And so they're on the list of cannot complete that we'll go back to as soon as
So
that
it's a
inventory is
subset
available.
of the meters, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Thanks, sir.
And then we got the customer service recap sheet there as well. Y'all approved the amendment at the last meeting, and I think the project is moving forward with following that amendment, get the new systems, get the environments established so that testing can proceed. Didn't have on the commercial report, didn't have a lot of new customers this month, but we did complete a few. As you can see on page 90 and page 91, the shaded ones are the jobs that have been completed. So we still have a fairly lengthy list of commercial projects out there that we're working on. And if there are no questions on any of that, I will now ask Jason Avent to come up and give you the 115 kV program report.
Good afternoon. So slightly different report than what you received last month. There's been a few modifications. Some projects have been added to this report as we had promised last month. So last month we reported on 14 individual projects. This month there is 16. So at the end of the report, we've added Holly to Southeast and Holly to Slayton. A few other minor modifications. The report is being presented to you today. The budget line items to the top side of the report, so the appropriations to date, expenditures and such, the terminology has changed to better align with Andy's financial sheet on page 126 of your report. So the same terminology, obviously the same numbers will be utilized on both sides, so hopefully that helps better be in alignment with Andy's information. As well as if you look under the monthly forecast sections, this can be on the middle left. We're showing actuals versus the previous month's monthly forecast, just to kind of show you how the overall construction team is forecasting the projects, kind of how those are in alignment. I'm going to hit the projects at a higher level, kind of go a little bit faster this month. If you have any questions on any of the projects, just stop me as we go through them. First project is the McDonald's substation. Right now they're finalizing the tiebreaker. All general construction at that substation is complete. Next will be Chalker to Oliver. This is 92406 and SIP number. General construction is complete. There is some underground riser issues that LP&L is working on internally, as well as a few of the davit arms are having to be replaced with alley arms and davit extensions. Between that project and the next one, Chalker to Thompson and Chalker to Oliver both, the Plaska contract that y'all previously voted on, apologies, there we go, has been removed from those projects. You'll see that on the funding level. I'm going to skip forward a few, so we're going to pass Slayton, Red Raider, and Red Raider Tap. So I'm going to try to. There we go. McKenzie Substation. So McKenzie Substation is currently in active construction. It did start construction on June 3rd. Kind of a key measure here I wanted to draw your attention to that you'll see moving forward on tracked accuracy will be that same monthly forecast column. You see how the monthly previous month's projected forecast was much more than the actuals received. That's just to the delayed start of construction. Start of construction started about 2 weeks behind schedule. You saw that on actuals for the month. So just a few things to draw your attention to that you'll start seeing on the month moving forward reports. Most material has been received for that substation on site, and obviously that reporting date was as of 6:05. As of today, all material is on site. So moving forward well with McKenzie. We're going to skip forward several projects here pretty quick. I had missed a mistake on Holly substations. That's 92469. Apologies for that, but wanted to draw your attention to it. In the notes in the bottom, we're showing construction late October through mid-June of 2020. It's actually mid-May of 2020, so I just wanted to call your attention to it. And then 92477 is one of the new projects. 2-year report. So that's Holly to Southeast Substation. It's going to be one of our 2020 projects. We had fine-tuned the schedule from previous month till now, so you'll see that here, as well as the overall cash flow expected through 2021. Then Holly to Sladen, same for it. Cash flow through 21 as well as schedule. Both these projects show it to complete on time and ahead of the voltage conversion for their region.
One of the things, just for council's purposes, we're about to start the right-of-way acquisition work on these 2 lines. In most cases, we've got existing easements, but they're narrow, and we really need to get larger easements for the footprint and the blowout and things that we're going to need. So we're going to have to come back to the council in the near future for an additional delegation authority resolution. So be prepared for that, and then we'll start working on the right-of-way. We've got to get the right-of-way wrapped up in time to start construction on these lines.
Can I ask you? Because I just don't hear you. So, for example, on McKenzie substation 92467, when we say down there phase 05 construction in order to Canyon Power Solutions, is that a deal that Mr. Warda bid out?
Yes.
I don't remember seeing that for
That was awarded back in April.
okay. Was it, so we did approve. I just didn't remember the name, so.
That was RFP 7120-19-LP, and the
Okay.
board approved that in April.
Very good.
A lot of these are likely left on the consent, so if you don't
Right, if you don't remember
talk about them
yeah.
specifically, that would coordinate.
Okay. Well, that's why I asked, because I just didn't remember that particular thing.
This McKenzie substation project is actually a 2-phase project. I think Jason is showing everything on one project, but so there's work that they're doing right now that's really preparing that substation so that we can land the northwest of McKenzie transmission line at that substation. So we have a value for that transmission line to land. And then there's a bigger project that comes later on that will be putting the auto transformer in at that substation for the 115 kV to 69 kV auto transformer. So that phase will not start until later on.
And we can show the grades on the schedule for next month if that better helps paint that picture for the group.
I have a question. When it says outages, what does that mean? Scheduled outages, what is really out?
Right. We've got transmission lines, pieces of substations that are out at various times during these projects. Obviously, when you're rebuilding the transmission line, you have to adjust.
So it really just applies to that project.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the customer impact.
Sure.
It's just that we rerouted the energy.
And by the way, because of the complexity of this project, we've done a lot of work on outage coordination to make sure that we can take the facilities out when they need to be taken out without conflicting with something else. So we've had a lot of work done on outage coordination.
On all these, it looks like it's in July, all July 2020 or 2021. Holiday Southeast. Do you anticipate that July 2020 for everything except the Holiday Southwest to be occurred?
I do not believe so. I think we have other projects during that time frame as well.
The ones that you got here, it looks like July 2020, these were all of the bills in the 19. That's the outside except for that 1,92477.
Yes, and we still have, I think, 5 projects we need to bring before the board in this format that will have to integrate that are also during that time frame. So these are not all the not all the projects on your current books that we're showing you today. So
But the magic number July 2020, or even the new ones you're bringing, or do they go to the 21?
I believe the majority of them are in 2020.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm
So-
just trying to get a time frame. Most of this should be through the system by July 2020.
So the major construction, there are some, I want to say Holly Tap, which is after the Holly Substation General Project, you have to tie in those T lines. That is one that is on the tail end of 2020. But next month we'll have more of those in the scheduled format to better paint that picture for you through. Last, it's going to be a new one, and apologies, this did not make your board book, so hopefully you can see it on the screen. We had a project kickoff meeting last week with Encore. So Encore on Thursday, here with LP&L, had roughly 50 people between both groups, plus all the consultants and their contractors, to kick off the overall ERCOT integration project. So everything that they acquired from Sherryland that they're building for both Encore and on behalf of LP&L. We kicked that general project off last Thursday, as well as specific project meeting kickoff on Friday. With that being said, it was a great meeting. Obviously, a lot of people in the room, but Encore is showing their best foot forward. They did provide their overall schedule for the full program. That's what I have up here for you today. Again, it's kind of hard to read, and I apologize. We'll have that in your book next month. But the projects here that are shown in red are what Encore will own at the end of the day. So in 2021, in blue is what Encore will be constructing for LP&L, and will transition to LP&L at the end of the day. So call it July of 21, somewhere in that time frame. Long story short, again, the dates are hard to read. They are targeting on every project to meet or beat, on every project right now, beat the ERCOT integration date, which was June 1st of 2021. The dates you're seeing are all the way through commissioning, so construction will happen before this, and that was actually going to be the commissioning time frame, and then overall conversion into ERCOT. The one thing more than likely we'll see shift here is the dates actually brought back. They were open to that discussion because we're going to need about a month with a little float to actually do the conversion into ERCOT. So hopefully over the next month or two, we'll look to bring these dates back to kind of a May 1 time frame to allow LP&L that integration time frame to ERCOT. So didn't want to speak too much on this. You'll see this format broken down into a more traditional, what you have in your book now, per project that LP&L will own at the end of the day, showing cash flow, showing open issues that we're tracking moving forward. So I just wanted to make sure we got this before the board, and apologies didn't make the board. That's all I have for the group today.
All right, thanks, sir.
That's it for my report.
All right, that brings us to item 9, presentation discussion financial capital statements. Andy?
I'm sorry.
Number 9.
Rhonda Manick is going to present the monthly financials again this month, so she's going to start with her slides.
Well, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I've been told that the remote is a little finicky, so if I mess up, you're just going to have to bear with me, please. All right. So let me tell you about all the fun things we did last month in April, starting off with our income statement. As you would see, we have a change of about $7 million in our operating revenue and going downwards. That is because of the PPRF rates we set in October in anticipation of the lower PPRF cost. But we did have an increase of $1.6 million in our base rate, which was offset by the $9.9 million decrease in our PPRF revenue. But along with that, our expenses are also going down. We are $8.1 million down, and the largest part of that is this $2.1 million right here. In our other category, that includes our professional services, legal, and all the other costs, we had decreased because we outsourced our printing and billing revenues, which led us to $2.2 million decrease in expense. And that little decrease is offset by an increase in our supply and maintenance category, leading to that 2.1 right there. Our purchase and fuel power continues to come in at 5.5 so far. That is clearly because we are enjoying the lower natural gas prices coming out of the Permian basis. That has made us look better with 8.1 in total decrease in expenses. Now you would also notice that our transfers are lower compared to last year, because last year was the catch-up year related to the Citizens Towers debt catch-up payments we were making. Since we don't have those catch-up payments this year, you see a nice decrease over there. So moving on to our balance sheet, for the first time we see a little bit of decrease in our cash. That is related to the debt payments that we made in April. But as we move forward, that should eventually even out, and nothing to worry about there. Our receivables are down. That is related to the seasonality. We are not in the hotter months as we anticipated. So I think as we get hotter and hotter with the weather, it should go up. But our collections are still just as good as any, so nothing to worry there. Our restricted investment continues to go down, but that's a good news because we're using that money to build all of our capital projects. So there's almost going to be in line with our increase in the capital assets. So capital assets in this particular month compared to prior month has increased 8.3 million. So excitement is building. With our liability here, we're also on a good track. We are decreasing our liability. You will see a $3 million approximation decrease in our accounts payable and due to line. Part of that $3 million is $1.6 million less in our WTMPA invoice due to our cost, and other $1.6 million is related to our regular O&M expenses, our capital expending, but those are just timing of the liability, so nothing to worry there. Our deferred revenue continues to go up, as again, because we have a good natural gas prices, we'll see some increases, fingers crossed, not to worry about that. And our biggest decrease this month would be in the other category. Now that other category of $5.1 million is made out of the two different items. About $3.1 million of that was in accruals that were booked at the year ends that we have paid as of right now and rewinded. In those accruals, we had the 1.8 million TTU payment that everybody, I hope, remembers. We had $900,000 in the payroll expenses and about $300,000 in sales tax. So no more accruals. But the largest increase in that file was also a $2.1 million interest payment that we've been accruing for. Since April was the month we made a payment on our debt, that's led us to that decrease. So looking pretty good. Now, how we are comparing to our budget, I would say our revenue in the consumer meters, you would also see there's a decrease. So it's about 7.32% decrease when you compare it to the last year. Now, that is also largely because of our purchase power raise and cost not being in line with it. But on the other hand, all our other revenues are pretty much doing better than what we had anticipated. Part of the reason being we are doing all the constructions for the street lights and the poles and the work orders. That has about $300,000 increase in that. We also have a power marketing revenue that went up about $700,000. So we continue to do better in that category. On the expense side, everything seems to be tracking along pretty good when you compare it to the budget or the prior year, with an exception of the transmissions cost. That is only due to we have a less admin cost, engineering, legal, all related to transmission. But as we continue to build and do more things, I think that is going to come up or track pretty good along with our budget. We also have a substantial increase in our fund level expense that also relates to us making a debt payment. And as we move forward throughout the year, there shouldn't be more changes, as it would be our only one last payment in April that went through. And that leads us to all the good things we are building. As you would see, as I mentioned, we have about $8.2 million that we spent compared to last month itself. And here are some of the biggest projects I have highlighted for you here. But as Jason mentioned, there was page 126, which has the breakdown of every capital project that we have going on or we are working on outstanding right now. And when you compare that $8.2 million to all the depreciation we are taking, we are building at the speed of about 5.67 times the CapEx spending is compared to depreciation. So we're looking pretty good. And as we continue to build more, that number should look better and better. And that takes care of all of it. Any questions for me?
Yes. So on the reinforce your point on the statement of cash flows on page 115. So you mentioned the debt service on the budget. Basically, we paid $20 million principal on bonds this month.
Correct, in April.
Yeah, well, in the current month. And then another 8.3 on CapEx. So that 23,080,000 that's year to date through April, that plus whatever interest we have is going to be the bulk of what you have budgeted for the annual period, right?
Absolutely.
So there won't be another payment in the fiscal year.
No, not another big payment in the fiscal.
There'll be a much smaller interest payment in August, but that's on some older debt, and it's a small number. But yeah, by and large, it's paid.
Okay. Good, very good. Thank you.
All right.
Questions or comments? All right.
All right, thank you guys.
Previous to item number 10, discuss take action on the Power and Light fiscal year 2019-20 operating budget capital program and make appropriate recommendations to the city council of the city of Lubbock pursuant to 2.03.415A and the ordinances of the city of Lubbock, Texas. On this motion. Motion.
All right. Management is once again pleased to present the fiscal year 1920 operating budget and capital program. I know we went over this in quite a bit of detail at the June 3rd EUB meeting and also jointly with the Finance Committee. So I wanted to give a little bit more of an abbreviated presentation from what I gave at the June 3rd meeting, but still wanted to provide enough information for you. And as I mentioned last time, if y'all have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask those questions. And if you've come up with anything since a few weeks ago, then please let me know. But the budget is a balanced budget, I guess.
I just wanted to make a comment for the council that we weren't here, the majority of quorum of our boards here, so we, almost all of us, not everyone, have gone over this in great detail, previous meeting.
All right. Mention again that $240.7 million is the amount of the total budget. That's the operating budget. We also have $182.5 million of capital proposed for the 1920 fiscal year. In the budget document that you've all been provided, I'll just briefly touch on a couple of areas that are important to focus on if you have not had a chance already. First is the narrative. It's about an 11-page document that goes into a good amount of detail on the aspects of the budget for the future, for the next year's fiscal year. Also, beginning on page 13, there are two financial models included this year. We've done that to provide two different outlooks of utility. One, a retail choice outlook, and another, a non-opt-in entity or knowing version of the model. The financial models for fiscal year 1920 are identical. However, the out years are when they begin to diverge and look different between the two different options that the board and council are considering. Also, the biggest chunk of the document is made up of capital, an overview, and also detail sheets for each capital project. It takes up the bulk of the book. And also incorporated in there is the tariff. The clean version of the tariff is in your bound budget document. In the agenda book for today, there is a red line version of the tariff in case you want to be able to easily identify all of the changes that have been made there. At the beginning of the narrative in the document, there is a mission statement and goals and objectives of the utility, and I wanted to highlight four of those that are important and are interwoven in this budget. The first is the 4 nines uptime, which meaning 99.99% of the time the lights are on, which we do meet that metric, but we also know that there is improvement needed there. That is our reliability standard. The second is consistently low rates. We are working constantly to keep rates as low as possible for our customers, and so that is our emphasis on low rates. Third is the Friends and Neighbors resolution, which is our customer service priority that we work on continually. And fourth is resolving the future power supply, which is our focus on the future. And I'm going to go into each one of those just briefly. The first goal and objective is the 4 nines uptime, that 99.99% reliability. A part of that and what's incorporated in this budget is a large capital program specifically for the 69 and 115 kV loop projects. This map in blue shows the outer 115 kV project, and the inner kind of neon green is the 69 kilovolt loop. In the current budget, there are 36 projects totaling almost $170 million for that. We believe this year we will be able to close 10 of those projects, about $30 million worth. So we'll have about $139.7 million, all in various stages of completion or startup in the budget right now, but that is what is incorporated in there to continue to improve the reliability in town. Second objective is our low rates objective. The blue pieces of that pie chart are what we would call our base rates, as you know. The light blue is for customer service and billing processing. That's a little over $8 a month for the rate 1 and rate 3. Those are all of our our residential customers. The energy piece is about 3.3 cents for rate 1 and 2.9 cents per kilowatt hour for rate 3. We are not recommending a base rate adjustment in this budget. This is the second year in a row that we have not recommended that there any base rate adjustment. On the largest piece of the customer cost, there is the power cost that we pass through. Those costs we pass directly on to the customer. That is based on actual costs at the time, and we set those seasonally. Over the last 18 months, we've reduced that rate 4 times. Most recently, on June 1st, we reduced that power cost portion of the rate by 11%, which for the rate 1 customer was an overall decrease of about 6.8%. So that has just gone into place. Hopefully will benefit customers throughout the summer season as their consumption is higher. Along with that, we always track the comparison of our rates against other utilities in the state and with SPS up in Amarillo. For the winter months, we were higher than the Texas and SPS, which, as you recall, typically utilities have low rates in the winter and high rates in the summer, and we've reversed that trend by stabilizing that throughout the course of the year. So we would expect we'd be a little bit higher in the winter, but a little bit lower in the summer, and we believe that'll be the case in this summer. So the average customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours went from about $111 a month to $103 at the beginning of this month. So a focus that we'll always keep at the forefront on low rates. Okay. The third goal is our customer service focus. As you are aware, we have significant projects in place. We've already talked about them a little bit, both of the advanced metering project that Itron is heading up with us, then the billing system or customer information system. Oracle is providing that softwares and systems for us. CIS is customer information systems. MDM is meter data management. And MWFM is mobile workforce management systems. So all of those are underway right now. We believe all of these projects will be complete by the second quarter of 2020. We talked about this a moment ago, but this is a little bit more updated. This was as of Friday. We have a little over 17,000 installations of the electric meters that are in place at this time. So that is a focus in one portion of our business. Another focus, we've already talked about the large investment in our 2 loops, and we've already also talked about a lot of the ERCOT infrastructure, but there are 9 capital projects in this budget totaling $209 million. That's our part of those costs of those overall projects, which are shown in the dotted red line on the map to the left. But that is a significant part of our capital program going forward. So that kind of highlights those 4 goals and objectives and how they fit within the budget. At this point in time, I'll just wanted to provide you some overviews of kind of the makeup of revenues and the makeup of expenses at LP&L. First of all, on the funding sources or revenues, the vast majority of the revenues come from that pass-through of power costs to the customer. About $150 million is our proposed revenue stream for power costs for next year, almost 2/3 of the overall revenues. The next largest piece is the base rates. That service availability and energy charge make up about a little over $68 million, or a little less than 1/3 of our overall revenues. The remaining funding sources are relatively small in the scheme overall, about $21 million or 9 0.1% of the overall revenue streams. But so I wanted to kind of explode that piece of the pie, the other funding sources, just so you can get a understanding. I wanted to point out, again, no base rate adjustment proposed. But if you expand those other funding sources, you can kind of see the makeup. About half of them are made up of the franchise fee revenues that we charge and that we transfer into the city. The next largest is the transfers in. Typically that comes from the other utilities that we handle customer service and billing for. That covers things like their contribution towards the AMI and CIS projects, their portion of transfers for the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, the IVR, the generator. They'll all be part of the Citizens Tower project that we're anxiously awaiting the completion of. Fees and charges make up the next largest funding source in this area. That has to do with reconnect fees, disconnect fees, late charges make up about $2.7 million. Interest earnings follow behind at about $1.5 million. That's up substantially over the prior years, almost about a $400,000 increase this year over last year, just due to the fact that interest rates have risen over the last year from Federal Reserve actions. Then you kind of see the rest of those smaller portions of funding that comes in to cover different areas of our business. On the expense side, you can see the makeup. This excludes purchase power costs, so this is just looking at the operating costs of utility. By far the largest portion is capital related. That's not only principal and interest payments, but that's also the cash transfer into the capital program to fund those cash related projects, which this year we're recommending about $14 million of cash be transferred to the capital program to fund those projects. The next largest chunk is the transfers out. These are transfers to the general fund for franchise fees and payment in lieu of property taxes for the most part. Compensation and benefits are a significant portion of our operating costs, $15 million for compensation, about $6.5 million for benefits. Next largest is professional services and training, about 6%. So you can see the remainder there. It gets smaller as we go around the pie chart. But just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what that looks like. And then also power costs. This is the other part of our major expenses. $150 million again is the total projection for next year. The largest chunk of that is the energy cost in SPP, about almost $70 million there. The next largest is the capacity payment, which is the whole reason of our intent to move to ERCOT, to eliminate those costs going forward, or at least the majority of them, at least 70% of them. Transmission is another significant cost, $30.9 million, or about a fifth of the overall power costs. We this year have moved in the production cost into the cost of power because we are now utilizing our own generating units to provide power for our own load, where historically we've just sold that into the market. So that is part now of the power cost. And we talked, I think, at the last board meeting how we're changing the power purchase power recovery factor to power cost recovery factor. So it's not just purchase power any longer. It's all of the sources of power that we have at our disposal. And then this very small sliver of energy costs from with the Elk City contract that began on June 1st. So some of these changes, like the LP&L production in Elk City, all are new as of June 1st in the power cost portion of the business. Now, specifically about the next year budget, these are the funding sources and power cost that we're proposing. Again, I said it was a balanced budget. I've split it again between power costs and operating costs. So you can see on the power costs, it's about $150.1 million, and we have the power cost recovery factor revenues that will be charged to cover that. On the operating side, $90.6 million is the funding sources. That's made up of those base revenues and all those other funding sources I just talked about to pay for all of the operating costs, which about a third in the red is for operations and maintenance. That's our payroll, benefits, supplies, maintenance, all of those assorted costs. In yellow is the capital cost. It's about 45% of the overall cost. And then about 17% of our overall costs are related to transfers. That kind of gives you an idea of the budget. If I compare it to the current year's budget, so comparing 18-19 to 19-20, we're seeing a drop of about $11.3 million in our power cost expectations. Biggest decreases are in energy. And we're continuing to see low energy costs through lower natural gas prices. We're anticipating the forward look of NYMEX gas costs are about $2.93 per MMBTU. We are expecting the Waha to be about 27% lower than that. That is not as much of a difference as we're seeing this year. We're seeing about a 47% drop from the NYMEX to the Waha this year, but so a little bit less of a drop, but still very low cost for us on natural gas, driving that drop from this year's budget to next year.
And real quick, how volatile is that? Could it spike for whatever reason?
It's very volatile, but it's overall it's staying well below what we're seeing in NYMEX. So.
Well, I mean, we certainly benefited from it, but forward looking, how quickly can that change? I guess.
Right. Well, the whole reason for the low costs are because of the congestion in our area. They can't get the gas out of the Permian Basin, so it really depresses those local prices on natural gas. There is it's a Kinder Morgan Gulf Coast Express pipeline that's going to be coming on in October of 2019. So that's why instead of having a 47% discount to the NYMEX, we're only having about a 27% discount because that pipeline will come on in October. It relieves some of the congestion, but still not all of it. And then in November of 2020, we have another, it's called the Permian Highway Pipeline that will come on that basically we believe will relieve all of the congestion in the Permian Basin and will get us back to more normal. Normally, Waha is about 6% less than NYMEX anyway, so we're always a little bit below the NYMEX estimates. But so we will see more than likely increases in our costs for purchase power over the next couple of years as those pipelines come online and as that congestion issue goes away. So, but we have that modeled forward looking. So it will be an impact. Our customers are benefiting from these low costs today. More than likely we'll see increases though over time, but we'll be getting more back to a national average than we are. This is a very localized issue that we've been very fortunate to witness. Yes, ma'am.
So is the pipeline going to come on in October, November? Will that address about half of the congestion or 40% of congestion?
I don't think it's the larger pipeline. I think it's not as large as that second one that comes on in November of 2020. I don't know the percent. Basically, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I don't believe it's the larger of the two that are going to be coming online in the next year and a half or so.
November of 2020 part's over.
Yeah, we believe it's over. Back to normal then. Yes. Any other questions? All right, capacity is, we're a big winner this year in capacity because of the new contracts that are in place. Something that we finally can point to with all the work that's been done over the last several years of these new contracts with SPS. So we're really benefiting from that. This current fiscal year, we're going to see about 4 months worth of savings, but next year we'll have the full 12 months worth of savings, which will reduce costs by about $9 million for us. Transmission costs are also expected to be down. They continue to increase, but they're not increasing as fast as we had originally proposed last year. So actually this year, we're well below our budget for costs on transmission. So we're really going to see an increase in transmission costs next year, but it's below, when you're comparing budget to budget, it's actually a decrease for next year. So we're pleased with that those costs aren't ramping up as quickly as we might have thought they would. And I mentioned a moment ago that we're moving fuel and production costs, our own generating units, into the power cost. And so that's about $10.6 million total that is moving into our cost. So even with that increase of $10.6 million in our costs, we're still seeing an overall $11.3 million decrease in our purchase power costs going into next year. On the operating side, we're down about $5.2 million from the current fiscal year looking into next year. And I wanted to highlight the changes that make up that drop. The big chunk of it has to do with the production and fuel that I just talked about a moment ago. It's gone out of operating, so it's reduced our operating cost and it's gone into the power cost scenario. So that is a drop of our cost in the operating side. Franchise fees and pilot are down for next year. Remember, that's based on franchise fees are 5% of metered revenues. Property taxes are 1% of revenues, and we're expecting those revenues to be down because of lower cost. So that reduces the transfers into the general fund for those two items. We also have about $1 million less that we're transferring to capital to fund that capital program I mentioned a moment ago. We're transferring about $14 million. We had about $15 million this year, so down just a little bit. We do have some increases. I wanted to go over a little bit of detail. Professional services is up about $1.3 million for next year, and there's several reasons for that. What this chart to the left does is kind of walks you forward from the 18-19 budget to the 19-20 budget. So you can see Oracle and a few lines down, Itron Managed Services. Those are two additions. Those are the basically cloud services that we're purchasing from Oracle and Itron to manage and run all of our new billing systems. Those will come on in the next fiscal year. Kubra, we have about a $500,000 increase there. That has to do with that second phase rollout of the ability to look at your usage, your AMI usage online. We're also adding another kiosk at the Citizens Tower. Right now we have 2 in our lobby. We'll be adding a third. We'll also be getting kiosks that can get change. I know that's been a concern over time. When we first got the kiosks, they did not have the ability to provide change. We'll be able to do that with a new version of the kiosk. And also, as we continue to promote the use of credit cards, our credit card fees increase as a result. So all of that is kind of embedded in that increase there. NewGen is a consultant that we utilize to help us put together our rate case for the transmission cost of service recovery rate case that we'll need to file next year. They'll also be revising our cost of service study as we get closer to having more advanced metering information. They can identify how to make sure that every class of customer is paying for their share and what costs they impose on our system. Every rate class will be fairly paying for their use of the system. So that's part of what that cost of service study does, and will be the beginning stages of that next year. Distribution software has to do with increases related to our interfaces with ERCOT that need to take place in advance of that implementation or integration. So those all are drivers of those increases. We do have a couple of large decreases. We were reducing legal expense expectations by about $500,000. And also this year we had about $500,000 budgeted for the opt-ins to retail choice study, and that won't be in the budget any longer. So those offset those increases. So again, overall, a $1.3 million increase. Compensation and benefits are up just shy of $2 million. We are recommending the increase, a net increase of 6 positions. The recommendation is to add an underground crew, which is made up of 5 positions. You can see there listed. A streetlight crew is also requested, just 2 employees. We also have a reduction of 1 meter reader in the budget. There will be additional impacts to the meter reading area as we become more automated, but as of October 1, the project is not complete at that time, so we will be still almost basically at full staffing in that meter reading area, at least on day 1. That's not the full $2 million. That really only accounts for about $460,000 of the overall increase in, or actually a little less than $400,000 of the overall increase for compensation. We also have a 3% merit added in to the compensation, which is about $430,000. And we have a little bit of higher expectations with terminal pay, about $140,000 next year. We also have a lower amount of our payroll that's being charged. Right now, a higher level is being charged to the capital projects, as a lot of employees are spending a lot of time on these capital projects. As some of these begin to wind down, our charges to those capital projects begin to diminish, and more of that cost comes on the operating side. So that impacts our operating costs about $320,000. So all of those really add up to the slightly less than $2 million increase for compensation and benefits. Principal and interest is up a little over $2.2 million. If you recall, last year we issued about $98 million in bonds to cover a large part of our capital program. That's really mostly an increase in interest cost related to that debt, about $2.2 million increase for the most part related to that. So again, overall, it's down about $5.2 million, but that makes up the major drivers of those changes. On the capital side, this kind of shows the entire capital program, what we have appropriated to date, which is about $240 million. and that's what we expect to have open as of the beginning of the new fiscal year next year. We're requesting $182.6 million of capital items to be added. You see the bulk of that in the transmission line, about $154 million of additional costs related to transmission. Then we have the last next five planning years, about another $162 million in those out years. A lot of that in the distribution side of the house as we move forward. So the overall capital program in your document is $585 million. It's really a 6-year outlook plus some projects that are currently underway. What we look at every year is what's that balance between cash funding of those projects and debt funding. You can see over that time horizon, we're looking at about 28.6% cash funding versus 71.4% debt. Our goal is to be a 35-65 split, but due to the magnitude of the transmission projects that are in the budget, that's been really difficult to do that and keep rates where we have them. One thing I did want to point out is I mentioned a moment ago we have two different models, and I'll go briefly over those in a moment. Under the retail choice model, we have lower reserve requirements, which frees up some cash that we could actually apply to capital projects. So if we did that, it would actually raise that cash funding to about 31% and debt funding to about 68%. I'll go over that in a little bit more detail in a moment. That kind of gives you an overview of the big picture of the capital program. Financial models, as I mentioned, we do have two in here. The first one is a retail choice model, and what we've done is we've anticipated, of course, ERCOT interconnection begins on June 1st of 2021. This would recognize retail choice 6 months later on December 1st, and that's how we modeled it. That's how we modeled the costs in that version of the model. On the NOI or non-opt-in entity model, it's basically status quo from what we see today for the most part. So we'll go over the differences here in a moment. But again, the 1920 budget that you're considering is identical in both of the financial models. They begin to diverge in later years of the financial model. So what is the same between the two models? I'll kind of touch on that first. First of all, in the outlook, the horizon, which is next year plus 5, we do not anticipate any base rate adjustments. We believe that is possible. We believe throughout that we will continue to pay, at least this is what's modeled, is we'll continue to pay all of the costs in the Southwest Power Pool grid, all of the transmission, energy, and capacity charges. It also recognizes that we'll be paying the same basically for transmission in ERCOT over the same time frame. We have hold harmless payments in these models in the future years. As you know, part of our integration into ERCOT required us to pay $24 million to Southwestern Public Service and $22 million a year for 5 years into ERCOT. So that's embedded in both models. We also have in both models higher costs related to our new transmission system that requires maintenance and oversight in the future. And we also include that increased debt service that's related to all of the transmission build-out that we're undergoing right now. And it also includes that new revenue stream throughout both models from transmission cost of service that pays basically 1.5 times your debt service for those pieces. We also have relatively small in the scheme of things, but the no program costs, as you know, we will finance our projects a little differently over the next couple of years than we have in the past. Instead of issuing bonds, we'll be issuing notes, and the board and council have just recently approved that. So that is the same in both models. So now I'll just hit on a few points that are different, significant differences between the two models. Energy cost is a big one. Under the non-opt-in entity, which is basically kind of similar to what we do today, we would continue purchasing power in the future for 100% of our customers. So for the energy piece, that would continue over time just like it does today. Under the retail choice scenario, that would shift to the retail electric providers. So those costs don't go away for our customers, but they do go away for LP&L, the entity LP&L. So those costs would then be on those retail electric providers to purchase power and to sell that power to customers. So that is a big difference in the model overall. Another difference, it doesn't make a expense difference, really. It's really neutral, but it's in how the franchise fee and the pilot transfers are calculated. Under the non-opt-in entity status, just like it is today, we pay 5% of our metered revenues to the general fund and 1% to the general fund for property tax. Under the retail choice, in an effort to maintain stability with those transfers going to the general fund, we would change that from a percent of metered revenues to basically a per kilowatt hour charge. And it just so happens that it works out to about 0.5 of a penny per kilowatt hour for the FFE and 1/10 for a pilot. So basically that provides the same revenue stream that the general fund sees today from those two sources.
By the way, I would mention for the council's benefit that I think this will provide much more stable and predictable revenue streams to the city. As Andy was talking about earlier, we're benefiting from really low fuel costs. Well, it's hurting the transfers because you're basing it on percent of revenue. And with the cent per kilowatt hour model, it's going to be consistent and predictable because our energy doesn't vary a lot.
Good point. Thank you. Another change between the two models under the current scenario or the non-opt-in scenario, we collect fees, as I mentioned a moment ago, for reconnecting and disconnecting customers, late charges, those types of charges, roughly $3 million a year. Because, again, that would shift to a retail electric provider. That goes away from our portion. We would still collect it for the 30% of the customers that remain in the SPP grid, but the majority of the ERCOT customers would shift to those retail electric providers. So from our standpoint, that would drop revenues of around $2 million a year between those two models. A big change because we are no longer purchasing power and passing power costs on to our customers. That changes how the reserves are calculated. Potentially, I mean, the council or the board could say they want to increase the level of reserves compared to revenues, but currently we keep 3 months of revenues in reserve, which is around between $65 to $70 million a year, depending on that somewhat volatile revenue stream. Under retail choice, because we are not in the purchase power business for that segment of the customers any longer, that 3 months is lower. And it makes some sense because by no longer being in the more riskier part of our business, purchase power business, we no longer have as much risk, and so I think it makes sense to have a lower level of reserves. What that does is we currently have almost $70 million in reserves. If you get to the point where you have $48 million requirement, you have some excess cash that you could use, and I was recommending you use that to pay cash on capital projects. You could do a number of things with it. The council, the board could recommend a number of things, but I think that would be my recommendation would be to fund additional capital rather than debt financing it. So you can see a drop ultimately of around $19 million and what that reserve requirement would be between the two scenarios. Yes, sir.
You said the council or our board could change our reserve?
Well, I mean, the board could always recommend, say instead of having 3 months in reserves, you could have 4 months in reserves or 6 months. I mean, council will have the ultimate authority on the reserve requirement. But
you mean they could not approve our budget if it didn't have something right, but they don't. Council doesn't dictate our reserve, right?
well, there is an ordinance that was passed by the council, probably was revised in 2012, that dictates what the reserve level needs to be, and which is the three months of reserves, and so. It would take council action to change that. And so I'm saying that if you leave it where it is, our reserve requirement drops under the retail choice model. But there could be, for example, Austin Energy, they have a 6-month reserve for that they keep on hand. So it's all over the place. I mean, but I think 3 months is probably more of the norm. But there are other utilities that have higher levels of reserves, and there may be good reasons for it. The riskier business, I feel like we're reducing our risk going forward with a retail choice change. So I think that merits a lower level of reserves. But that we could always leave it at that higher amount, which would equate to a 4 or 5 month reserve balance.
All that makes sense. Primarily driven by the flower
you're a much more.
Overall, 3 months makes a lot more sense.
Yep.
It is. Has S&P or Moody's recommended reserve requirements?
No, they don't. They don't typically do that, but they have noted that ours is more in the norm. I mean, it's normal. I mean, I think the Government Finance Officer Association usually recommends a 3-month. It depends on the riskiness of your fund. I mean, they recommend different things, but I think it could be there could be some basis for why we would have a 3-month.
Like a lot of banks, the rating agencies think the more money you've got in collateral, the higher your rating is, or your interest.
The last slide I have related to financial models, just it has to do with that transfer I was talking about, just a higher amount that could be transferred to the capital program because of the fact that you have excess funds available from a lower reserve requirement. This is just an example. But over the time frame, you could have about an additional $17 million that could be used to pay cash for capital projects as opposed to debt financing those. So that's what we have in the model. These models will change and morph over time as we know more and as we come up with different ideas. But this is what we've kind of presented to you now, just to give you a flavor of what it could look like in the future under either scenario. That basically finishes my. I thought it was a short overview. It was a little, I probably talked a little longer than I should. If y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I don't know if Kevin, if you want to make any comments from the Finance Committee meeting from.
Well, the Dorian Debt study was very, very interesting. That was my first time to be involved in it. Being an accountant, I loved all the columns that go with it. It was very self-assuring, actually, so I feel very comfortable about all of this.
All right, that's all I have, unless y'all have anything else. I do have some more presentation on the tariff, which is the next item, but I'll pause to let y'all consider that.
The council, any board members who weren't privy to the meeting the other day, I think most of us were there. All right, who's on the tariff? Oh, sorry.
We need a vote at this point.
Can I vote on this first?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's
If you so desire.
All right, we had a motion earlier, Mr. Bell, second, Mr. Boatman. I think you're recommending the budget as well as the finance chair. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, ayes? All right, we pass 7-0, or 8-0, I guess, with Mr. Taylor absent.
Okay. All right, thank you. Item 11, do we need a motion?
Yeah, we need a motion, sorry. Number 11. That's kind of late line in here. Discuss take action on the fiscal year 2019-20 electric rate tariff schedule and link appropriate recommendations to the council state level pursuant to 2.03.415A the code of ordinances of the state of Lubbock, Texas. And take a motion for that.
So moved.
Motion is staff in a second. Go with this second. Ms. Henry. And discussion
All right. Again, I'll give a little bit more abbreviated presentation than I did on June 3rd. There are a number of changes in the tariff, and if you look at your red line, you see a lot of red. We made a lot of cleanup items. We decided just to go all out and fix some things that have bugged us for a long time. Most of those are pretty immaterial, but I did want to highlight some of the more material items. There is a section on deposits at pages 136 to 138 of your agenda book, which what we've done here is kind of a cleanup item, but it does bring in line the residential and non-residential requirements for deposits. There's just been some language changes here that in one place it may say if you're been subject to interruption of power, you have to pay a deposit. Some places say you actually have to have been disconnected. So we've made that where it's subject to interruption of energy in all cases, just to make it clear. So basically, a customer who twice has not paid their bill on time and are subject for interruption would be subject to having a deposit reapplied. If you've been subject to interruption in the past, you would have that applied at the beginning of your becoming a customer of LP&L. We also have added some requirements for deposit In the residential section, it was already in the commercial section, but in the residential section right now, it was only for disconnection, that you would have a deposit reapplied, which now says subject to interruption. The commercial side, if you have a bad check, if you've tampered with your meter, if you have failed to make a payment on a payment arrangement, those are all reasons we can reapply a deposit. And so we've made it consistent for the residential customers, just like it already is for the commercial customers. So that is a cleanup item as well. We've put in a new deposit refund section. There was already a section there on refunds. However, we have separated it into its own section, and again put some consistent clauses there on when those refunds are provided. Again, after a year of meeting those requirements, residential customers will automatically have their deposit refunded. After 2 years for commercial, will automatically have theirs refunded. Access to premises on page 139 and 140. There was already language there. The meter is our property, and it provides that we have access to our property on the customer's property. We've added a little bit of additional language to gives us a little more leverage to be able to get into those meters if necessary. For example, in the automated meter changeout, advanced meter changeout, there are some circumstances where we might need a little bit more ability to get in and have access to our property. Net metering rates. Right now, we already require an interconnection agreement, but it doesn't say what happens if you don't fill out an interconnection agreement. So we have added that you would be subject to disconnection if you do not fill out that agreement. We must have that to know what risks are on the system and what impacts that those systems have on our system. It's very important for us to know that what's going on out there. So that takes place on 3 different net metering rates. There's residential, small commercial, and large commercial. Demand on a number of rates. You see all the pages where that is. We have added the measurement period. We've added 15 in there. Historically, the tariff only had 30-minute periods, but now that we have advanced metering, that's on a more often occurring. So we've added that. Whether or not you're on the advanced metering or not, it'll apply in either case. On page 182, there is what is called an alternative meter charge. That's already been on there. That is if the customer does not want the advanced meter, there is an additional charge for an alternative meter. We have waived that fee throughout the implementation of advanced metering infrastructure. What we originally had in the tariff was at the conclusion of, which is somewhat vague. So we have added a specific date. That is, we believe that falls after when we will have the advanced metering program completed. So we wanted to make sure there's a defined timeline there so customers are aware of when they might be required to pay for a new meter if they require a manually read meter. There's a new transmission tariff. It's going to be rate 16T. A very long time ago, LP&L did have a transmission rate, but we didn't have any transmission customers, and so that's gone away. We have had a request of one customer to be added possibly as a transmission customer. So we worked with NewGen, that company I talked to a moment ago that's going to help us on our TCOS rate filing. They helped us to come up with a costing related to a transmission rate. So that is new into the tariff. And then we also adjusted the state university tariff to reflect the latest terms of the contract that the board and council approved in December of last year. So that mimics the Texas Tech agreement now. And the last slide I have on the tariff, there's a demand cap. We've been working for this will be our 5th year to work to phase out what is called a demand cap. What that does is it basically somewhat subsidizes all the other customers of LP&L are subsidizing the cost of certain large commercial accounts for their demand costs. We've been gradually weaning those commercial customers off of that rebate, basically. And so we do that in a way where it wouldn't increase that portion of their bill more than 20%. So every year we're incrementally reducing it. Yes, sir.
Flywheel from the flywheel effect from competitive
Yes, sir, it is.
So it took all these years.
Yeah, and it'll take a number of more years to unwind it all the way, but every year it affects less and less of our commercial customers. I think this next year it's going to impact, it's around 350 customers. Last year it was,
Why did we have to slowly wean it?
well, I think we were just trying to limit the impact on it on an annual basis because for some customers it could be a large number. On average, the average customer impact with this change this year is about $250 a year. And so it's $12 a month roughly. So it's not material over the scheme, but there are some very large customers that it's more meaningful than others. And so we've tried to just ease them into that.
And I'll tell you the other side of the coin, this is there for all, especially all.
Overall, it's $110,000. So out of a $240 million budget, $110,000 it's a small number overall, but it's just one of those things. We're trying to be as good to the customers as we can and incrementally fixing some of these issues rather than, all at once in their face, fixing an issue.
Chairman, I would just say there's a rate-making principle that you don't want to adjust rates to impact individual customers more than 20% in a year's period of time. So that's kind of what we follow here. I don't remember the organization, but it's kind of a well-known, well-adopted rate-making principle.
Best practices kind of a thing.
Adopted by the big customers.
No, I'll get you more information.
Just having fun.
The last item, right now we only charge for reconnection today. So if you have a disconnection, there is no fee. So what we've done is basically split that reconnection fee in half, and we'll now charge half basically upon disconnection and half upon reconnection. So that way, if you're a customer who has not made a payment, you're disconnected, and then you make your payment and you're reconnected, you're basically out the same amount of money as you are under the current tariff. However, there are a lot of customers who may get disconnected for non-payment and then skip town. And so at least we can add that to their final bill and do our best efforts to collect on that. So it helps to collect on some of these costs that we are impacted by sending a truck out today to disconnect these meters. Now, the disconnect and reconnect fees we may be bringing back with changes once we go into the automated environment, because we do still want to cover our costs. It will move from a cost of rolling a truck and a labor cost to a system cost. And so there may be some adjustment there, but at this point we're not recommending that. We're keeping the disconnect and reconnect fee where it is as of before we're fully automated. So, but that's one change that you'll notice in the tariff as well, and that basically covers the major issues that I wanted to highlight in the tariff. And I have one more. Sorry, skipped. I mentioned this a moment ago on the purchase power recovery factor, because now we're changing that to power cost recovery, because it's not all 100% purchase power any longer. We have our own generated power costs involved there now. We're changing the name. Also, as you recall, we had a cap under the current tariff that caps our over recovery at $24 million. And so once that is met, then we will basically get back to the existing tariff under the pass-through rate, where we have that band, which is basically about $7 million over recovered to about $7 million under recovered. Kind of gives us a boundary so we can manage those rates for our customers on that pass-through cost. So we absorb the volatility. The customers don't see that volatility in power costs. So that is the last change I wanted to highlight. And now I'll turn it over to any questions.
Questions, comments? All right, we're not going to take a vote. All those in favor of item 11, please do so by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion passes as well. That brings us to consent agenda. We have one item on here. Actually, two items, sorry. Item 15, we're going to pull it off and talk about it separately first. And 18 has been scratched. So we'll go to 15 first, or we'll get all the rest of the legal meeting. Okay. So consent agenda is item 12, 13, 14, 16, 17 with 18 get scratched and 15 will go side to dock. Motion by Mr. Belton, need a second? Second. All right. Any discussion? All those in favor, about saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. That one carries 12-8-0. That'll bring us to item 15, consider resolution authorizing the director of utilities to execute for and on behalf of the city of Lubbock, acting by and through Lubbock Power and Light, that certain Third Amendment to Government and Public Affairs Agreement by and between LP&L and Philippine partners regarding professional government and public affairs related consulting services. Mr. Rose.
So I can
Will you bring that up? Sorry. We have a motion to bring that up, correct? We have a motion, sorry. That motion is second? A second? All right, now we'll have a discussion first, sir.
I'll kind of walk through the history of how we got to today in terms of our relationship with Wilco. In 2015, as you know, in September of 2015, we announced that we were going to make a move and apply to join ERCOT. So September of 2015, we started that process. We initially reached out and began our relationship with Hilco with a letter agreement, but then shortly after they signed the original contract. The original contract was signed in February of 16, and it ran through June of 2017. So it ran about a year and a half to cover us through the 17 legislative session. And from that point, we've renewed this contract on an annual basis. It started out as a contract that was $10,000 a month, that allowed for a $500 on a monthly basis, a $500 kind of incidental account for paperwork or if they've got separate items, but it was capped at $500. So we took that contract in its form through our entrance into ERCOT. We gained when they approved our application in March of 2018, and so when I brought this back to the board. In June of 2018, we adjusted the contract. We modified the scope a little bit, but really we adjusted the contract to take the fee that we paid from $10,000 a month down to $5,000 a month, because the amount of work that they did as we were gaining entrance into ERCOT through the approval process was pretty extensive. And then once we got through that process, their workload understandably would go down, and so we moved it down to $5,000 a month. What the contract covers today is for them to provide strategic guidance to LP&L on the overall regulatory and legislative outreach and education, to maintain and expand regulatory and legislative relationships, to monitor and report on regulatory and legislative issues, coordinate Texas messaging with our broader communications, and closely coordinate with leadership on regulatory activities. Now that session is sine die, and obviously you have all of your reps and senators have gone home to their district to take a breather. They will be coming back to the Capitol in the coming months, and so what we will be doing is getting back in front of a lot of these folks to let them know where we are in this process. A lot of the meetings that take place are meetings amongst statewide leadership, but also reps and senators that could be involved in our project. So it's important that our folks at Hilco are on the ground, maintain those relationships so that they can let those reps or senators know where we are in this process. Obviously, we're building transmission lines right now, and they go through counties and areas that are not necessarily just our delegation. And so those are some of the folks that they work with, but really across the board, across the state, they're out there kind of every day managing our messaging to those folks, making sure that they know where we are so that we don't have any issues that arise that we're not well ahead of. And looking forward, obviously, we'll have a few months where they don't do much, but then as we get 6 months and 12 months down the road, they'll start getting back into interim committees, interim charges. They'll be looking at the scope of competition report. They'll be looking at the ultimate committee reports. And so as we go through that process with everything we have ahead of us, we need to be kind of making sure that we are kind of controlling that messaging, making sure they know where we are, and that there's not somebody else out there that moves a particular direction that stops our momentum or creates an issue that we have to work on.
Questions, comments?
The message I sent yesterday, Matt, that you called me on, I asked you how much, or I asked how much we spent within each of the years. You have that information.
pay them $5 a month, regardless of if they do more work or less work. It's $5 a month, and they have every single. Eddie Solis is our primary contact, although we also have Dan Pearson and Jay Howard that work on our behalf. And so I talk with Eddie about once a week now that we've closed down session. Obviously, they all got kind of busy, and so back half the session that waned a little bit. But we're back to Eddie and I having a call once a week to kind of review who he's talking to, who he's going to meet with, those types of items. So they're continually doing work, but it's a set 5,000. And so in fiscal year 15-16, it came to right at 103,000. 16 and 17, where they did kind of the bulk of the work leading into all of our stuff, it was right at 126,000, and then it scaled down since then. 17, 18, it was 116, and this year to date is 50,000. So at that 5,000 a month, you're looking at $60,000. If they use all of the 500 kind of incidental account, you're looking at 66,000 per fiscal year.
So how you get to 100 or something if it's 5,000?
Because it was 10. It was 10. It was originally 10,000 a month.
So this is the first year it's going to
Second year. This time last year we reduced it to 5,000 and modified the scope to look
most
for.
of FY 18 was at 10,000.
Yes, because this was changed, basically starting in July of last year, but our fiscal year just runs through September. So this is the first fiscal year that we're at the 5,000 amount.
Do you get a written report from them each month?
I do, and they send an invoice that shows any incidental charges or anything that they might.
What kind of incidental charges do they use?
Oh, it will be any sort of materials cost. If it is having to go to lunch with somebody, those types of items, they'll catalog and send receipts on that.
So in addition to $5,000, we're paying for lunches and beers.
No alcohol.
I mean, the expenses.
No
that's
alcohol,
an alternative in the lobby.
but for example, when we were going through the regulatory process, like Tony Barcelona, who was the committee chief for Byron Cook, they were doing a lot with her, and in that instance, we were able to have Byron Cook write us a letter, because he was kind of well apprised of what we're doing. So they're meeting with staff members, they're meeting with members, but they're giving us reports anytime that they meet with these folks.
But if they have any out-of-pocket expenses, like taking somebody to lunch or coffee or whatever, we get billed for that in addition to the flat.
It's capped at 500. Yes.
Capped at what?
500.
Thank you.
Sure.
So on that 500, it's 5,500. All right. Or it's 45 plus that.
It's just 500 per month.
In addition to the 5,000.
It's worth the 66,000.
Yes. Yeah. Instead of
See that account. Other questions, Ms. Stafford?
Who did you say you were working? Eddie Ortiz?
Eddie Solis.
Eddie Solis, and so we have four individuals that are registered on our behalf. Eddie Solis, Dan Pearson, Jay Howard, and Buddy Jones. Buddy is the owner of the firm, and so he's registered for all accounts. But Buddy has done work on our behalf. He has intervened in certain areas, so there are times when he gets engaged. But he just does that to make sure that he's registered for anybody he might reach out to on our behalf.
I'll just say, I know Eddie, I've worked with him on other projects, and when I was on the school board, we engaged Hilco on some stuff. Their reputation is they're very effective. Eddie works hard for us.
Yeah.
Did they ever come and meet with the board? Any of them?
No, ma'am. They did not. But I mean, they would not be opposed to doing that, but they have not to this point.
Give you a face with
Yeah.
the person.
Why don't you have them come next month and just slow up there? See what.
Not all of them, but maybe
Yeah,
one.
sure.
No, but Eddie would be more than happy to do that.
Did we do an interview process when we hired them originally, or did we just negotiate with them?
We negotiated with them. You know, there are kind of two different ways that you can go. As you mentioned, that you've been in government relations before. There's kind of two different ways you can go. You can engage with subject matter expert lobbyists or firms that do kind of specifically one track. But this was never an area where we were specifically looking for kind of narrow legislative fixes. This is something where we wanted in kind of an all, kind of a shop that has the best of all worlds. And so that narrows the field. And so, I mean, you do have, you know, Blackstone that does this, you have Hilco that does this, you have focused advocacy. But what we were specifically looking at, Hilco was well positioned to do that. And so from what we've needed them to do in terms of getting in front of these folks, they've always come through and been able